Welcome to the Cycling in Alignment podcast, an examination of cycling as a practice and dialogue about the integration of sport and right relationship to your life.
Greetings and salutations, Space Monkeys. Before we begin our episode, a brief reminder that this podcast depends on support from the audience. The reason I am able to continue with this project is because of the support of patrons. If you are a member of my audience and you feel I have offered you insight or added value to your cycling journey, please consider a visit to my website, colbypierce.com, where you can make a contribution to the Cycling in Alignment podcast. You can support the show for as little as $8 for a one-time contribution, or choose to subscribe as an ongoing member. Thank you for your consideration. Here's your reminder to think critically, act intuitively, and pedal consciously.
So anyhow, that's our conversation is certainly meandering, but you're right that I can let my ego rest and know that all of this information will ultimately be available to people in a classroom setting. Mm-hmm. And I would love for, teaching anatomy and physiology and exercise science or health classes, exercise physiology, biomechanics, helping people even understand the definition of biomechanics versus kinematics versus kinetics versus kinesiology.
All those confusing K words.
Yeah. But one day you're right. I hope to be in an audience setting where, whether we're talking about metabolism or breathing or the endocrine system, help people have very practical takeaways and how to improve their own life.
It took me a long time there was a little voice in my head when I started fitting, even when I came back from training with Steve in 2012, I think it was. I always forget. 11, somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. And there was a little voice in my head that was like, we have to make this practical. I can't just talk theory the whole time and then send someone out the door and pat them on the butt. Be like, now go ride your bike. You have to give people the most practical takeaways. And that's a non-trivial thing. I mean, if you like working with a cyclist or working with someone in the gym, cueing it's an art.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I have lots of clients who come to me who have been over-indexed on cues they've been given. And now we have a disastrous consequence or unintended side effect. So someone says something, the perfect example is, you had lower back pain, and someone teaches them how to contract TVA and contract rectus, or contract TVA rather, if they're doing if they're kind of up-leveled. But then the result is that because they've had maybe some posterior disc bulge or some sort of pain associated with lumbar flexion that is bending forward, then they kind of become mummified in their lower back. Yeah. And then they can't move, and they're always doing this, and they've been taught, effectively to brace the core. Yeah. And maybe they're lifting the pelvic floor. And so now we've coupled that with this inability to have any flexion in the spine. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then that usually is coupled with the breathing pattern, because if you're always bracing in the core and you try to go hard on a bike, the only place to really get lung capacity is to become a chest breather, right? So that's one example. And so we end up with this over-indexing of cues that can have unintended consequences, or we end up with a cue that just is ineffective, and an athlete can't intuit what you're trying to explain. So you really have to have, this is like an Einstein thing, right? You have such an overwhelmingly 5D understanding of a subject that you can explain the most complicated physics, biomechanics, physiology in one sentence to an 8-year-old and have them get it and go, oh, this is what I should be doing. And that's everything, right? That's all the knowledge you're learning at the PhD level, all the knowledge that I've learned at whatever level I'm learning at. If we can't distill it to something that's actionable and understandable, then you're just,
it's kind of meaningless,
mouth vomiting, useless crap. And
stay in, you want to stay in a certain field, like, academics to to just be able to do that day in and day out. But you want to be able to sit a real expert. I think that's the point you're making, and that Einstein was making, is a real expert can teach an 8-year-old.
Yes.
Can take the most complicated topic out there, synthesize it into something that you could tell someone on an elevator, whether it's an 8-year-old or your 80-year-old father.
Right.
So that they're like, got it.
Or your Aunt Jane at Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And so this second semester, it's a much different class taught by a different person. Who doesn't have them memorize those sorts of things. The likelihood of them coming out with like utility is much higher. I would even take it a step further, where it's just like, well, those are the types of things you learn in a master's degree or a PhD. And that's what makes it a terminal degree. But yeah, like we should be sending people out into the world who are capable of doing things.
Yes.
Whether that's integrative physiology department or the communications department, like, should it really be 4 years anymore? Like, can't we do this in 3 years now?
Yeah.
Do we really need somebody who's going to be, pursuing, I don't know. I look at the requirements obviously, Colby, like, the elephant in the room, right, is that these are not educational institutions anymore.
Yeah.
Right. They're banks.
Yeah. They have to stay open. Finances drive.
And when we turned all of them into Research One institutes where it was about grant funding and grants, like, it's not about education.
Now it's an economic model.
It's an economic model. It's
first.
A bank.
Yeah.
It's going to be really interesting to see what happens over the next 4 years, because that has been the number of emails I see on a daily basis about what's happening in that world.
It's crazy. I saw an article the other day that said Trump's going to get rid of pennies.
Wild times, man.
I know. I'm cool with it. I don't really like pennies myself.
I guess having said all that, like, I also applaud people who are self-driven enough to pursue it on their own, like you are. And like, I hear you saying, like, well, I may have limitations in my understanding of things, but, to that, I say, well, are you contributing to society in a positive way? And I think that's unequivocally yes, right?
I mean, hopefully.
You're driving people towards health.
Yeah. And this is something I think, I appreciate Peter Attia's comment on this. Like, he put out his book not that long ago. It's called Outlive. And he talks openly about how he didn't really want to write a book because he knew that by the time it came out, he would have already changed a lot of his views. And I frequently steal a quote from him, which is strong opinions loosely held. Meaning you really are convicted about the things you believe in and you believe them wholeheartedly, but you also let them go as soon as you realize that you were wrong or you screwed up or you learned the next wave, because information and knowledge is horizontal, right? And you never reach the horizon. You walk forward and the horizon just keeps going. It's a sphere. But, which reminds me of a recent movie my wife and I watched that I'll just do a plug. And if you haven't seen it, I don't recommend that people watch movies often, but everyone needs to see this movie. So I'll break that rule. It's called Max and Molly in the Future, or Molly and Max in the Future.
Haven't seen it.
It's like super out in the middle of nowhere, like
where do you see
indie film. I don't know. We found it on our Xfinity box thing. Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest. Saw it on Amazon Prime or what. But
title again?
Max and Molly in the Future.
Okay.
It's like, imagine sort of a movie that's really dialogue based, but if I had to put a spin on it, it's like When Harry Met Sally, but with really crappy on purpose special effects in the future, like Mystery Science Theater 3000 type special effects.
Nice.
But just biting commentary about today's politics and all these euphemisms that are just on point. And the last line of the movie, I'll ruin it for everybody, is she says, wait, so we have to go in a circle to go forward? Right. And he says, yes, that's the paradox, right?
Right.
So that so eloquently sums up so many trends in exercise physiology. Like,
oh, sure.
Right?
For sure.
Like the obsession with carbs right now and so many other aspects.
Yeah.
Have to go in a circle to go forward.
I think that's one of the it's one of the struggles I have is like, here I am in biomechanics, but I don't really believe in the biomechanical model. Right.
That's awesome. Paul's totem pole's right on that wall, which.
Yeah. I mean, it's a subset of a lot of complex aspects of the human body, right? Just one tiny little sliver, but by no means do I say like biomechanics explains everything, because it not only doesn't not, but we can't even explain a lot of biomechanics. But like that's that's also the trick for me, I think, in science, right? People think of it as a thing. Science is an idea, right? The idea is that we pursue asking questions in a way that's repeatable. Yes, in its purest form. And the mistake is that people imagine that when you answer a question, that is an end point. Right. But knowledge is horizontal. So if we take that as a given, then it's like there's always another. We open up a new door, and suddenly there's a whole new pool of information that's going to advance us further. And most summaries say more study is needed to further understand this problem. Like good science does, right? Then you kind of say, well, how much good science is there? And less now, I think, arguably, because it's just like you were pointing out about academic institutions. They're really banks. Yeah, it's people have recognized that science is leverageable to generate money, and now, so you can, and science can be manipulated. It happens all the time. Fortunately for me, I personally am in a field that is not that susceptible to that, right? Like when you start getting into, gut microbiomes and pharmacology and like these things that where pharmaceutical companies can intervene, that's where it becomes deeply, deeply problematic. And, I think one of my, I get this huge frustration where it's like, okay, you get this $10 million grant from the NIH, which is government funded, which means taxpayer funded, right? Then the research gets done, and then that research paper is behind a paywall. Right? I already paid for this. We already paid for it. Yeah. We should have direct access to it all the time. Yeah. And it should be under one paywall. Yeah. For me, like publications are not my end all be all. Like I want to publish 4 papers. Those 4 papers are going to be very matter of fact. It's like we're doing a survey with amputees to understand why they don't use cycling more. So that'll get published. Then I'm going to basically take, 8 to 12 people off the couch, do a couple of tests with them that help understand like strength and mobility based off of amputee standards, then expose them to 6 weeks of Zwift, then redo those tests. Coming off the couch, it should be a dramatic increase in those metrics. Yeah. I'm going to take a set of force measuring pedals that are like $40,000 in our lab and basically understand the differences between regular cyclists and amputees in terms of how they generate power. And then I want to take that data to e-bike companies, motor manufacturers, and say, let's create learning algorithms in the motor so that you can optimally help assist the athlete. I want to get, that's cool. I want to get veteran amputees. I want to get them on mountain bikes. So off-road, they can be in complete control of their safety and security. Yeah. Like I don't ride road bikes anymore. Or even gravel's nice because then they can participate in able-bodied, or we'll say fully limbed. I don't know what the right term is. Yeah, I wish I thought, gravel's more safe than road. And for sure it is. And I'm just talking about like distracted drivers. Yeah, right. Yeah. But you still see like the nature of gravel racing right now is not. It's just showing cracks in the armor where we're getting pushed back and people are starting to hate everybody on a bike. That was a 4-way stop that nobody stopped at and there were cars. Oh my God. So, guys, stop being your worst own enemies. Yeah, for sure. So anyhow, like I want to get them on mountain bikes, and you think about the torque profiles, and if you've got one leg doing twice as much work, and then the e-motor responds, and then you get tire slip and all that kind of stuff. And so, not only can you improve on that, but then you could send someone out and say, hey, you know what, we're gonna work on this right affected leg where we're gonna assist it less. Yeah. And so you have to do more work. So that's the 4. Like that's my research, and that's what I hope is the end all be all outcome. Yeah. And so when you do that, I mean, it's very applied. It's pretty basic. I don't have to do much statistical manipulation at all. Like very basic analysis of variance type stuff.
You have to apply all these complex models and ANOVAs.
No
and
large
all that,
data
whatever
sets.
That stuff is. Yeah.
And then the end goal is very applicable to people who are out there with lower leg amputations. Like, I need to modify my socket this way. I can do clipless or flat pedals, doesn't matter.
Right.
And here are the 3 e-bike motor manufacturers. If I want to do an e-bike, these are the ones that are doing this new technology.
Right.
And go. But so I'm very fortunate to not be in a field where really there's even an opportunity for it to be, I don't know if compromised is the right word.
Yeah. Funded.
Funded, yeah. The VA hospital was where we would get funding if it gets funded. As far as I'm concerned, like, I don't know. Maybe I'm lying to myself, but I like to believe that that's a good use of taxpayer dollars, right? You see armed services veteran who loses a limb, who then ends up on a couch, who then ends up with diabetes, who then ends up with more amputations, on and on and on.
Right.
Quality of life is down.
And they did it for our country.
Right?
Yeah, we paid to go have them get blown up or whatever.
However the person interprets that side of it, I'm not going to get into that. But they did it.
Yeah.
We should take care of them. And if putting them on a bicycle and doing bicycling research helps get them out of that cycle of diabetes, weight gain, mental, like.
Well, you'll know this as being involved with Wounded Warriors in the past. Like, I mean, veterans it's a huge thing. And I've got a couple clients who are veterans. I mean, without having had a limb blown off, their lives are at times extraordinarily difficult post-service. You know, they're trying to integrate into normal society, and they've got all kinds of PTSD and other issues.
Yeah.
So,
and cycling is something that helps kind of stabilize things.
100%.
Right? Endurance
or
activity.
Any endurance activity, right? Metronomic endurance activity helps to. It's a we'll say an alternative form of medication or a better form of medication, right? And we all need medication in our lives to some degree. So, just a question of what your relationship is with that medication. And
so as simple as my research is, I see it as a mechanism to affect that terrible cycle. And a world with more people on bikes is, I mean, despite leaving the industry, more butts on bikes is still my prerogative.
Right. Maybe not on roads, but yeah. Which is, man, the sport has changed so much since I started racing.
Oh, for sure.
It's like,
we used to be able to train on roads, like.
And there used to be races on the roads.
Oh, yeah.
Boy,
I wish I could go on record with my story about that, but we're going to turn this off.
All right.
Remind me to just say, hey, tell me about bike racing in the U.S.
Okay. Well, I've destroyed that one before in the past. I mean, I've told all my stories about the 3-day stage races we used to have in ski towns all over Colorado.
What do you think caused the collapse of American road racing?
I think it was a combination of, I think it was event fatigue, because it wasn't just bike races. It was also marathons and triathlons and kinetics. And you can only have so many events in a summer town. So there was that. Then there's more there's just more people in the US, and there's more cars equals more conflict between, and then the sport grows. There's the Lance boom. So we had more cyclists and more cars. More people get hit. And that led to a drive in liability insurance or insurance costs. And so insurance costs skyrocketed. Like, insurance is insane for everything now. But as a promoter, you're trying to put on the Buckeye Road Race, the 108-mile local road race, where you're going to give the winner of the Pro 1-2 race $125.
Pair of socks.
And a pair of socks or whatever. Yeah, exactly. And an expired gel. Or they didn't have gels back then, but whatever. And an expired power bar.
They had Jogmate back
then. Tiger's Milk. Remember those Tiger's Milk bars?
No, I do. Oh, yes, I do.
Yeah. They were like little chocolatey, power bar-y sort of things filled with all kinds of contrived chemicals.
Yeah,
So I think insurance played a huge role in that.
Yeah.
And then it became a money-making game where no promoter could, it used to be a real love of the sport. Oh, I'm going to do my road race, and that's what our club does.
Yeah.
And USAC used to have a club model where to be a club, you had to put on a race, which was quite brilliant. And so every club had a mom and pop crit, but all the crits got relegated to business parks. You couldn't pay enough to have the towns shut down the streets anymore because it was too inconvenient.
Had to hire the police department.
And then the police department and then insurance.
Yep.
So I think it was a combination of those things, but I can't imagine the insurance costs now. And even, Beth Ranestis has told me point blank in the past that for them to get the Coors Classic to happen in Colorado, they had to go through legislative channels to allow, because I think at the time, if I remember correctly, I'll probably butcher this a bit, but my understanding is you couldn't have a permitted event, public event on state highways in Colorado. But Colorado is Colorado. Like, you're going to do a 10-day stage race with 8 stages in Colorado or whatever, or 10 or wherever many they had, depending on what year you're talking about. Like, you can't get from A to B without going on highways. There just aren't enough roads here.
Yeah.
So they had to go through the Colorado legislature to change that. And the only way they could get it passed was if they had XYZ cops at XYZ, $300 an hour, which back then was like $1 million an hour.
Right.
And the Coors had the money to do that.
Right.
So on the one hand, we have this paradox happening where the Coors Classic is literally the reason I started bike racing, because I saw it at North Boulder Park, which is like 3 minutes from here.
Wow.
And I was like, whoa, that's cool. What's that? And I watched all these, La Vie Claire dudes riding around in the rain. And I was like, whoa. And there were probably 80,000 people in the park, probably 1986 or 7.
Oh, wow. So right after Le Mans.
Somewhere in there. Yeah. I didn't know what bike racing was or anything. And then I had a friend who raced the Red Zigger Mini Classic, which was the junior stage race based on the Coors.
Yep.
And I watched him and was like, that is cool. I can do this. Like, I saw it at first and was like, that's neat. And then I saw I could do it. And I was like, next summer I'm doing this. And I sweet talked my stepmom into buying basically an entry-level race bike to get to school and back. It was a Nishiki Prestige.
Little marketing spin, never hurts anything.
Yeah. And then I did my first race, and I was like, it was like I got hit by lightning. I was like, I'm a bike racer now. Nothing else matters. Went home and shaved my little 15-year-old boy legs. But, and so we had the Coors, which brought racing to Colorado, but only select promoters who had big sponsors could then do a road race with a highway, because they had to pay for so many cops and so much off time and overtime and then insurance rates. That's my opinion. I don't know if you have.
Yeah, you just started kind of teetering on where I would go with it, but it had a lot to do with the financial model.
Yep.
And we'll talk offline.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah. Cool. Tell me about. I just was curious, like, when you went to train with Steve, what was the most impactful part of that experience for you?
The only rule in bike fitting is there are no rules in bike fitting. Bio-individuality dominates everything. Which goes back to the flaw of averages article. Like, you the second you think like, for a client with this type of back pain, we put the saddle here, or do this setback, or do this trick, or put them on this saddle. The second you have that work with 3 clients in a row, one will walk through your door where you do the same thing, and they're like, ow, this sucks. Doesn't work. Yeah. So there's no formula. There is no bell curve. There's no statistics that give you anything. You have to start from scratch and assume you know nothing about the athlete and start to fact find. And the analogy I use for that is like you're going through a cave in the dark and you're spelunking and you're looking for gems. You get an emerald, then you get a ruby, and then you get a sapphire, and then you get another emerald, and then you get another emerald, and then you get another emerald, and you're like, okay, got 4 emeralds. You take all the other gems and put them in your pocket, so to speak, meaning this is like, I'm thinking specifically about the movement screen. When you're trying to figure out what their patterns are, what is their global pattern? How do they hold their posture? How do they hold it in standing? How do they hold it in walking? What's their strategy for making power when they do a lunge, when they do a squat, when they do a forward bend? Do they have any ability to flex in the lumbar spine at all? Or is it mummified, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah. What does their ankle and foot stability look like? Oh, it's disastrous. That's shocking.
Right. So did you stay with him while you were there?
No, I didn't. I couldn't at the time. I don't remember what the situation was, but I rented an apartment in Piermont in Sydney, which is like a little new development in Sydney. And I rode my bike to and from every day, which was like a 25-minute commute or something like that. And nice. Sydney is an angry little bee's nest, that is for sure. And then we went on rides together on the weekends, and we'd go to the brewery and ride for like 5 hours and then drink too many beers. And he would tell me all his bike fitting stories.
So I guess that was kind of what I was curious about. Was it like inside the fitting studio or outside the fitting studio?
It was
both. That made the bigger.
It was all of it. Yeah, it was all of it, I would say. Yeah. And I would say what blows people's minds, especially back then, was the manual muscle testing or muscle kinesiology.
Yeah.
That, for me, my wife is already well down that road. She studied with a guy named Raymond Grace who taught her muscle testing. She's also studied health kinesiology for many years prior to that point also.
Is that local? Or
Raymond was local, and she studied health kinesiology with a woman out of Bozeman for a while.
Cool.
So she's... Here's the other quote from Maximali in the future. I'm a level 7 space witch. I can fly. So now we refer to my wife as a level 7 space witch, lovingly, which she is. She's brilliant. And so for me, going and seeing the muscle testing wasn't mind-blowing. In fact, I had enough experience to be like, if we're using that magnet on the deltoid, is that really enough to make sure the client is grounded properly? And I felt like I walked out of there going, I know so much, but same thing. Knowledge is horizontal. Sure. There's so many ways I can see how this won't work.
Do you do the magnet stuff at all?
No, I don't incorporate that in my fitting, nor do I incorporate the foot correction. Largely because of to rewind like an hour. I don't want to treat, what do I see? I see someone with disastrous foot function, like dreadful forefoot correction or capacity to orient their forefoot on a flat surface and, catastrophic rear foot stability. Yeah. Do I want to jam a bunch of wedges in their shoe to try to get them out the door in a footbed? I don't. Right. What I want to do is go, dude. So for where I go for that is, here's a Peter Attia lecture. Right. We have the 4 horsemen, right? Cancer, diabetes, metabolic disorder. That is metabolic disorder. Cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, complications of Alzheimer's, and what's the 4th one? I'm forgetting.
Sorry, I can't help.
Cardiovascular disease, heart attack.
Okay.
So those are the 4 horsemen that kill, I don't know, something like 92% of all Americans.
Yeah.
The remaining, whatever percent it is, I'm making up the numbers a little bit, but that's the dominant. Most of the remaining is blunt force trauma, which in most cases is you get in a car accident because you're texting or someone else was texting and they hit you or you were drunk. Yeah. But occasionally you fall off a cliff or have a piano fall on you or whatever. And then the remainder of people die because they fall. They fall down.
Right.
They're going out to cruising out to get their paper and boom, break a femur, break a pelvis, break your head, humerus, whatever, hit your head. And either you die from that because you go to the hospital and you end up with MRSA, COVID, or, pneumonia, and then you never bounce back, or the last 5 to 10 years of your life is complete shit and you're in a wheelchair because you never bounce back from that. Yeah. So
long-term care.
What does that mean? That means do not have weak feet and ankles. Have good response time. Yeah. It means don't forget to jump rope. Yeah. It means do some skipping. Yeah. It means learn how to fall safely.
Have functional feet.
Have functional feet and also have a good sense of balance and good reactivity and good awareness of your surroundings. Yeah. Yeah. And cyclists have dreadfully weak feet and ankles because that shoe is so freaking stiff. And whenever you put a stiff lever in a system, that part of the body will become lazy by definition. Yeah. So
and it's not leveraging the patterns, central pattern generators that are associated with human locomotion.
Correct.
That was the entire premise behind my master's degree.
So do you know Chong Ji's work?
I don't think so.
Hyper arch fascia training. He's all about the foot and the ability to load the plantar surface of the foot and have it connect up to the posterior chain. And this is like, I'm talking to my writers about this every fit session. That it's so essential.
Yeah, it would be advantageous because we have lost, we've lost natural gait, right, as a result of paved surfaces and
Hokas.
I don't know that I would point to. Personally, I would say that those are a reaction to, concrete and asphalt.
A bad reaction.
And just getting away from surfaces that are natural to us, that our bodies are designed for, that, that Hokas and all the foams and all that stuff they're just a reaction to people being chronically uncomfortable because their feet don't.
Yes. Because they've gone so far down the path, they're band-aiding it.
And it's not just their feet, right? It's their pelvis.
Yeah.
Right? We sit, and we lose pelvic function. Yeah. We lose the posterior chain. we lose planting our feet directly underneath us. We lose those, in-series elastic components that allow us to really absorb and be dynamic. And so now it's just a thud, thud, thud of the heel.
But you put more foam under it, like, I'm forgetting the researcher's name, Irene Davis. She talks about how the research on this is quite clear. Like, you put more foam under the heel strike increases because it deadens.
Yeah, absolutely. So and then there's then there's this giant braking force, and it completely screws up the anterior posterior, like the balance that we're supposed to have.
The challenges just cascade from there.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep. And
I think so. Foam.
Yeah.
My hypothesis is foam is evil for the human nervous system.
I think if you don't know how to, so one of my favorite, like my wife and I'll go for a bike ride, and then we get off and we immediately go for a walk.
Yeah.
We grab our dogs and we go for a walk, and it's about getting back upright. It's about getting our pelvis underneath us, reestablishing that glute communication,
hip extension,
hamstring communication, getting the foot behind you, toeing off, truly putting force into plantar flexion, getting the toes to flex, all of that. Like, if you're a cyclist and you're not doing this, it's like not reading Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. It's a disservice to yourself. But
agreed.
Yeah, I think you can wear any of these modern shoes as long as your ability to put conscious thought into how all of that's supposed to work can continue to work. But I think that
you'd have to offset it with. Because if we have someone who's a cyclist and they're already disconnected at the ankle, right? I'm just making up the common scenario. And then we put them in ons, that's going to further that disconnection or Hokas.
But your example is somebody who's dysfunctional.
Yes.
So if you're somebody who's functional.
That's most people, though.
Well, absolutely.
Honestly.
Yeah, for sure.
Most athletes.
Absolutely. I 100% agree.
Well,
so I don't know that Hokas are causal.
No, I would agree they're not, but they're crap.
I mean, I
agree. They're not causal, but they're
crap for reasons just beyond their foams and whatnot. But man, shoe choices, like for most people, they're not even putting 10 seconds worth of thought about, is this good for me or bad for me? This is just this is what I saw in the advertising.
It looks cool. Yeah.
And this is what everybody else said.
And that's advertising, right? Like, it tells you that a Nike looks cool. I mean, just think about that for a second. It's a shoe.
I have one pair of Nikes, and that's the Metcon 6, and they have this massive toe box.
Yeah.
And they're completely flat on the bottom.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I wear those to lift. Yeah. And that's it. Yeah. But my foot still, like, occasionally I'll pop out of my shoes to do things that emphasize foot function, whatever the exercise may be. But otherwise, like, I can't cram my feet into.
Yeah.
Yet they still have a giant Nike Science Research Lab of biomechanists
who are all steered by the marketing before they come up with all their brilliant ideas. That gets translated through the marketing department.
Even more so than that, right? Yeah. They've got suppliers over in Asia that are like, "Hey, we have a new foam.
Yeah,
make a new shoe.
Yeah, we just spent $1 million developing this or whatever. Can you sell $40 million of these?
Be great no problem. If you had some data to back it up.
Right. Yeah. There you go. That's how the world works.
Yeah.
So did I answer your question about Steve
You did. Yeah, you really did. I mean, with his retirement note, and I was contemplating going down there, even though I was doing the PhD, I was like contemplating skipping out on the last 2 weeks of last semester and going down there, but he just can't do it anymore. And it more so than anything else, it was just like not wanting his fitting. It wasn't so much about wanting his fitting experience to try to be condensed into a 3-week period so much as just spending time with somebody that thinks like he does.
Yeah.
I think at a certain age, like, that's all we can hope for, is to be exposed to people who
mentors.
Push us to think more creatively or through different mechanisms. And so, that was partly it, but do you stay in touch with him still?
Not as regularly as I'd like. We do have a little chat group that we use amongst all the fitters, and we go back and forth there on a few random things and stuff. But I think for a while he was having trouble responding to emails, so I felt like I almost didn't want to burden him with more stuff.
I sent him an email when I saw the announcement, and I don't think I heard back for like 4 months.
Yeah.
And then he replied and just said, "Dude, I had to take care of myself."
Yeah.
I'm like,
But I think he's in a better place now, is my understanding.
Yeah.
And he made some big progress with He actually was exposed to Dr. Jack Cruz, and started going outside and grounding and doing more light and stuff.
He does a lot of light stuff. And
he's big on sunlight. Yeah. He's really highly educated, extremely opinionated, and thinks he is the shit. So there's that.
Good for him.
But
sometimes you gotta, in that world, I think sometimes you gotta dig your heels in.
Yeah.
And be ready.
Yeah, 100%.
You get attacked left, right, and center.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, well, never feed the trolls, right?
Right.
So, okay, maybe we can wrap up with a science question.
Oof.
How do I phrase this? So here I think there's a fundamental paradigm that I want to present, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. The idea that, and I obviously know my answer, but I'd love to hear your take on it. It's simply the idea that, imagine hypothetically that we could have a human, or maybe we could use AI as an example, who can read and digest and assimilate every single scientific paper ever written on, could be all topics, but we could even narrow the range to, let's talk cycling, coaching. So we're talking about everything from substrate utilization to ideal ways to train different metabolic pathways, to training test protocols, to crank arm length, to studies on cleat position, saddle offset, blah, 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 blah. Anything that goes in that category of human performance on a bike, assuming you could have someone who just could read every single paper and then assimilate that data and categorize it and apply it practically, would you then have the perfect model starting ready, set, go today at this instant to coach someone optimally? Would you know everything? Now, based on our agreement earlier that science is horizontal, immediately we could say no, but I'd love to hear, because I've had coaches come to me and say this. They actually believe this. And I think there's a bigger problem than simply that science is horizontal.
Yeah, there is, right? And that's the idea that it's siloed thinking.
Yes.
Well, I understand everything about performance and cycling. And it's like, well, I've read every single paper that I could get my hands on from, I think it was 1973 until now. Mm-hmm. If it's a piece of cycling literature,
so you kind of are that person.
The majority of it is,
gobbledygook.
I'll say junk.
Yeah.
Respectfully.
Right. Because people put their time and energy and lives into that.
Whether we're talking about crank lengths or, and let me make sure my master's thesis, I will put at the front of that line.
The front of the junk line?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Right. Like I did an intervention study and if
you want to,
4F,
right? Mm-hmm. That's what you're talking about.
Yep. Yeah. And the whole idea behind it was what I wanted to understand ultimately was that more of a like, were we leaning into central pattern generator tendencies more by going posterior with the cleats, thus gaining an efficiency, a neuromuscular efficiency? Unfortunately, at the time, we couldn't measure that.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So
now we probably could.
Great question. I think we can. Dr. Roger Anoka at CU Boulder has a really cool neuromechanics lab, and he's a very, very bright dude who probably could do that. So anyway, at the end of the day, though, that's siloed thinking, right? That's somebody who then, are we thinking about nutrition?
Right.
Are we thinking about sleep?
But how do those cross-pollinate?
And that's what I'm saying is you can't, like, if I were to just take all of the knowledge that I have from the cycling literature, be it from an exercise physiology standpoint or from a biomechanics, kinesiology, kinetics standpoint, I don't think that that's a comprehensive understanding of a person on a bicycle.
Right.
I think it's a very limited view.
Total
right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, but then it's just like, okay, well, what is the end? Like, where do you finally say, you know what, I know enough that I'm prepared to help people.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And like how much of a, I think the older we just said that like before we started filming, but it was like the older I get, the less I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so at some point we have to quiet that voice, and Colby has to be like, you know what, I'm going to deliver a good product.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
But
it's
I don't like definitive statements like that. I mean, I think the more I get involved in science, the more I like to open up the possibilities of like, well, what about this? Okay, cool. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
maybe for this person, but maybe not for that person.
Yes.
And so, I think the more you learn, the more you recognize that like putting people into buckets and thinking in silos is, it's a dangerous proposition. I think it's a fallacy in thinking. And I think the more that we can get out of our own paradigm of thinking, for me, it's like academia, and then I got into this world of body work, right? Totally different lens to look things through. And then, you get into the Paul Check world, and it's like totally different lens. And the more variety that we can create in our wheelhouse, the fewer silos that we subscribe to, the more open-minded we are to other people's ideas and not getting fixated on our own is definitely that's what creates the best. Rider, runner, walker, hiker.
Right.
General health.
Person who's in general good relationship with their health and their movement. I agree.
Does that like mirror where you're at?
It does. I would add to it from my perspective that the science world it's left brain dominant. It's consumed with the things that we can weigh and measure. And this is the part I have a problem with is I think, again, just as the athlete who believes that their cycling comes first and their health is maybe a product of cycling, or their health is an afterthought to cycling, they have this equation is inverted. Health underpins your performance, your athletic performance. I mean, think about it logically for 1 second, and there's no way you can disagree with me. Like, you have to be healthy to ride fast on a bike. And yes, there's a point when those paths become divergent at the top end, but there's also a point when health collapses, then it won't matter. You won't go fast at all.
If you're looking at it from a perspective of longevity, I'm 110% on board.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And even short term, there's a point when those paths become too divergent, but there's a point when you're maintaining that line of elite level athletic or world level performance as best you can, looking after health so that you can have the short-term benefit. That's a trade-off, Cycling or any elite sport is myopic by definition.
Yeah.
But I think where I'm at with it is science is consumed with the things we can weigh and measure, and they prioritize that as the thing that matters. Things that weigh and measure are definition. They're how we navigate the world of truth and knowledge. And if it's outside that sphere or domain of weighed and measured, it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. I think that's backwards. I actually think all the shit that matters is the stuff you can't weigh and measure. Easiest thought example in the world, or thought experiment in the world. Do you love your wife?
Right.
How much? I'm sorry. Right. You said you love her. How much do you love her?
All. Yeah. All the love.
Can you prove it to me? Where's the double blind?
Even from a science perspective, the visual spectrum that we're capable of seeing within the scope of all light, and then the amount that we can hear within
all sound vibration.
I think that in and of itself is as a scientist, I like to make sure that I keep those sorts of things in mind all the time.
Yep.
Like, hey man, the work that I do in this lab is it's a tiny little
sliver
aspect of what the global picture of human beings and in our time here. And I'm 100% on board that it's not healthy. It's not healthy to attach yourself to those things being fixed and being truth. And I think that was something that I saw that a lot during COVID, right?
Yeah.
The science.
Yeah.
We were being, through the major media outlets, being told that there is the science.
Yep.
And it's funny enough, the science in 2025 is not the science that we were hearing in 2020. Isn't that interesting?
It's so interesting. And it's amazing what people can do when they're really in the grip of fear.
Again, science is
can justify.
It's an idea, right? That we can ask important questions in a way that we can find a truth through testing and evaluation that's repeatable between individuals. That is the scientific method, right? But when we get attached to that, we're abusing the original intent of science. We're abusing the idea of science, and we're not allowing ourselves to be open to new ways of interpreting things.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Carbohydrates are good. Carbohydrates are more than likely the cause of the majority of cardiovascular disease and cancer.
I mean, you said it right there. Carbohydrates are good. And I think here's part of the problem is, like, modern society, we're subject to so much information. We have access to so much information that people are overwhelmed, and they're externalizing their power because they're overwhelmed. They surrender and they look for the expert, but you can't find the expert. We can find overqualified experts on both sides of any major topic, vaccination, to name, I'll just stop there.
Yep.
Like, you don't need to find one that's more firecracker than that, right? We have experts, unqualified experts, or overqualified, super qualified on both sides, who will swear upright, down, left, and center on their mom's graves that they are correct, and they are polar opposite in their opinions to this day. To this day. So what the fuck do you do when you're faced with a reality where we can pick up our phones and look at that and find it out in 30 seconds of searching, and we can see both sides? How do you know what to do? And I think this is the pivotal problem of our times, is this is why people, they surrender their external power, which brings me back to our original point, which is I want to teach people to be their own internal alchemist, to give them the tools to heal themselves, to be their own pharmacist, their own agent of change, reclaim autonomy.
Well, it's reclaim your attention, right? Our attention has been
externalized.
Well, it's been monetized.
And monetized.
And I don't think most people recognize
hijacked.
That, like, when they're on social media, they don't appreciate what is actually happening on a very deep level, which is like you're just giving yourself up more, and you're not taking control. And I think a lot of that it comes from our change of times. Like 50 years ago, even we had to do hard things as people, whether it was farming or whatever. Like, we had to do hard things, and now it's just a crisis of comfort. And we've allowed, whether it's, you may not touch social media, you may watch CNN or whatever for 8 hours a day. And when you do that, you've given up your own individual drive to look out for yourself. And to be honest with you, all of that stuff that's out there, you don't even need it. Like, if you just get off the couch and go for a walk for 45 minutes a day after you eat a meal, the profound effects of this, doing it day in and day out, is like, I don't even need to know if carbohydrates are good for me or fat is bad for me. Like, if I just get my ass off the couch and move.
That's a huge step forward. Agreed.
So we'll put our little drops in the bucket and see if we can help motivate people to do good things for themselves.
Awesome conversation.
That's been fun.
We went around the world like 4 times, I think.
How long have we been doing this?
2 hours, 15 about. So we'll split this into 2 episodes.
Cool.
So it's more digestible for people.
Nice.
Make it through all of our prognosticating and philosophizing and opinions.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Okay, Cyclenauts. Here's, as promised, the second part of the article, When U.S. Air Force Discovered the Flaw of Averages. I'm pretty sure that should say when the U.S. Air Force discovered the flaw of averages, but who am I? And remember, this is an excerpt from a book written by Todd Rose. The book is titled The End of Average. And the second part of this article begins now. A misguided ideal. 7 years earlier, the Cleveland Plain Dealer announced on its front page a contest co-sponsored with the Cleveland Health Museum in association with the Academy of Medicine of Cleveland, the School of Medicine, and the Cleveland Board of Education. Winners of the contest would get $100, $50, and $25 in war bonds, and 10 additional lucky women would get $10 worth of war stamps. The contest, to submit body dimensions that most closely matched the typical woman, Norma, as represented by a statue on display at the Cleveland Health Museum. This is a great story. I love this part. Norma was the creation of a well-known gynecologist. You can't make this up. Dr. Robert L. Dixon. Swear to God. Check it. And his collaborator, Abram Belsky, who sculpted the figure based on size data collected from 15,000 young adult women. Dr. Dickinson was an influential figure in his day, chief of obstetrics and gynecology at the Brooklyn Hospital, president of the American Gynecological Society, and chairman of obstetrics at the American Medical Association. He was also an artist, the Rodin of obstetrics, as one colleague put it. Excuse me, and throughout his career, he used his talents to draw sketches of women, their various sizes and shapes, to study correlations of body types and behavior. Like many scientists of his day, Dickinson believed the truth of something could be determined by collecting and averaging a massive amount of data. Norma represented such a truth. For Dickinson, the thousands of data points he had averaged revealed insight into a typical woman's physique, someone normal. In addition to displaying the sculpture, the Cleveland Health Museum began selling miniature reproductions of Norma, promoting her as the ideal girl, launching a Norma craze. A notable physical anthropologist argued that Norma's physique was a kind of perfection of bodily form. Artists proclaimed her beauty an excellence standard, and physical education instructors used her as a model for how young women should look. A brief edit or note, you all know how I feel about the word should. Suggesting exercise based on a student's deviation from the ideal. A preacher even gave a sermon on her presumably normal religious beliefs. Wow, the implications of this are incredible. By the time the craze had peaked, Norma was featured in Time magazine, in newspaper cartoons, and on an episode of CBS documentary This American Look, where her dimensions were read aloud so an audience could find out if they too had a normal body. So many problems with this. On November 23, 1945, the Plain Dealer announced its winner, a slim brunette theater cashier named Martha Skidmore. The newspaper reported that Skidmore liked to dance, swim, and bowl. In other words, that her tastes were as pleasingly normal as her figure, which was held up as the paragon of the female form. Before the competition, the judges assumed most entrance measurements would be pretty close to the average, and that the contest would come down to a question of millimeters. The reality turned out to be nothing of the sort. Less than 40 of the 3,864 contestants were the average size on just 5 of the 9 dimensions, and none of the contestants, not even the winner, Martha Skidmore, came close on all 9 dimensions. Just as Daniel's study revealed there was no such thing as an average-size pilot, the Norma look-alike contest demonstrated that average women did not exist either. But while Daniels and the contest organizers ran up against the same revelation, they came to markedly different conclusions about its meaning. This is also dark and fascinating. Most doctors and scientists of the era did not interpret the contest results as evidence that Norma was a misguided ideal. Thanks, men. Just the opposite, many concluded that American women on the whole were unhealthy and out of shape. One of those critics was the physician Bruno Gebhard, head of the Cleveland Health Museum, who lamented that post-war women were largely unfit to serve in the military, chiding them by insisting the unfit are both bad producers and bad consumers. Wow. His solution was a greater emphasis on physical fitness. Daniel's interpretation was the exact opposite. The tendency to think in terms of the average man is a pitfall into which many persons blunder. Daniels wrote in 1952, "It is virtually impossible to find an average airman, not because of any unique traits in this group, but because of the great variability of bodily dimensions which is characteristic of all men," and we can add to that all women as well. Rather than suggesting that people should strive harder to conform to an artificial ideal of normality, Daniel's analysis led him to a counterintuitive conclusion that serves as the cornerstone of this book. Any system designed around the average person is doomed to fail. I'm going to read that one again, because that's the whole point. Any system designed around the average person is doomed to fail. Daniels published his finding in a 1952 Air Force technical note entitled "The Average Man." In it, he contended that if the military wanted to improve the performance of its soldiers, including its pilots, it needed to change the design of any environments in which those soldiers were expected to perform. The recommended change was radical. The environments needed to fit the individual rather than the average. Amazingly, and to their credit, the Air Force embraced Daniel's arguments. The old Air Force designs were all based on pilots, finding pilots who were similar to the average pilot, Daniels explained to me, but once we showed them the average pilot was a useless concept, they were able to focus on fitting the cockpit to any individual pilot. That's when things started getting better. By discarding the average as their reference point, the Air Force initiated a quantum leap in its design philosophy centered on a new guiding principle, individual fit. Rather than fitting the individual to the system, the military began fitting the system to the individual. In short order, the Air Force demanded that all cockpits needed to fit pilots whose measurement fell within the 5% to 95% range on each dimension. When airplane manufacturers first heard this mandate, they balked, insisting it would be too expensive and take years to solve the relevant engineering problems, but the military refused to budge, and then, to everyone's surprise, aeronautical engineers rather quickly came up with solutions that were both cheap and easy to implement. They designed adjustable seats, technology now standard in all automobiles. They created adjustable foot pedals. They developed adjustable helmet straps and flight suits. Imagine that. No adjustable helmet straps. Once these and other design solutions were put into place, pilot performance soared and the U.S. Air Force became the most dominant air force on the planet. Soon, every branch of the American military published guides decreeing that equipment should fit a wide range of body sizes instead of standardizing around the average. Why was the military willing to take on such a radical change so quickly? Because changing the system was not an intellectual exercise. It was a practical solution to an urgent problem. When pilots flying faster than the speed of sound were required to perform tough maneuvers using a complex array of controls, they couldn't afford to have a gauge just out of view or a switch barely out of reach. In a setting where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death, pilots were forced to perform in an environment that was already stacked against them. So, again, that book is called The End of Average. I have not read the book. For the record, I've only read this article about 10 times now, and maybe I'll finally remember the statistics. But this book is by Todd Rose. It was published in 2016. So thank you, Todd, for that piece of writing. I think that's really illustrative of what's going on. And the implications are that we should make a bike that can fit the rider, which I partially agree with. Thomas and I got into this in the podcast. But also, we don't want to fit a bike to a, we'll say, catastrophically or even dreadfully dysfunctional rider. We want to improve their function. So for me, athletic performance is about marrying both. There are moments when you have to make the bike conform to the rider, and there are moments where you make the rider conform to the bike. It depends on what we're talking about. So it's endlessly, fractally complicated. But that's the beauty of bike fitting. And I think that's all I have to say about that. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this excerpt and reading, and I'm going to put a screenshot of Norma in my Instagram for sure, because there she is in her naked beauty. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation. As always, think critically, pedal consciously, and act intuitively. Attention, well dippers. Did you know that I offer a unique service at my studio in Boulder, Colorado? An integrative fitting is the culmination of my experience and understanding that helps an athlete have a deeper insight into their relationship to cycling and movement. This is understood in the context of how the dream, goal, or objective aligns the client's choices and habits. The psyche, the environment, and drive will all influence the current expression of athletic ability. As we understand these factors, we can shape and direct athletic potential. What this means in a practical sense is that we spend about 6 hours working together, including a short or outdoor ride. I will film you on and off the bike, and we will discuss an extensive intake questionnaire. You will leave the fitting with a unique perspective on your function and with actionable pathways to improve your performance. This service was created specifically to help cyclists who have been through various fitting sessions and have had unsuccessful or unsatisfactory results. We dig deeper to find more meaningful outcomes. If you are interested in knowing more about an integrative fitting, please visit my website, colbypierce.com, where you can book an appointment. Epilogue. I want to share a few brief thoughts about the inception of cycling and alignment. The purpose of this podcast is for me to get 3.5 decades of hard-fought lessons out of my skull. Some of them through my own research and reading. Some of them I've been taught through mentors and colleagues other riders, other racers. A lot of it, a massive amount of it, was simply trial and error through my own stubborn methods. And that has amassed a certain amount of experience and knowledge, understanding. And while I think I'm reasonably smart and I know quite a bit of stuff, I want to make it clear that the opinions that I share on this podcast are belief systems built on what I've experienced to this point. And that some of those opinions are pretty strong, but they are also loosely held. That is to say that if I learn more about a topic and have a greater level of clarity or understanding, then my old belief systems will be abandoned and I will now operate under that newfound knowledge. So I'm not here to tell people all the things that I know. I'm here to explain what I've learned to this point. And there's a big difference. Also, that is the intent when I discuss things on the pod with guests, is to learn from them and have a discourse. Because if we can't have a discourse as adults, then we've lost one of the basic tenets of modern society. Even if we disagree, we ought to be able to, in most cases, shake hands and walk away. Because after all, this is sport we're talking about, and while sport is training for life, it's nothing to get too upset over. The purpose of the podcast is to help me help other people, and specifically to help them actualize their highest potential by illuminating a path that enables alignment with their truth, their intent, and their coherence. That's really the end goal. So I'm grateful for your listening. My intent is also not, to be clear, to gain an audience or become popular or gain social status in any way. I don't care about that stuff. That said, if you feel an episode that you have heard will help someone you know, please share it with them. That helps us reach the end goal, which is to help more people. Thank you for listening. I'm grateful for your time and attention. Blessings.